I'd now like all of our panel to come up. And don't forget to send us through some Slido questions. I've got the advantage of having... Right. Thank you very much. And so we're going to have some insights now, and we're very privileged to have Sally North with us. So I'm going to ask something that I know from my work with employers and workers is the critical thing they want to know. What would compliance with the new code and the regs and the Act actually look like from your perspective? So we're going for the minimum now, and then we'll go for what good practice looks like.
Thank you. Is this on? Yes? Thank you. Great. I think, you actually spoke a lot about the code of practice earlier on, and I think that's a really great place to start in terms of compliance. And, what we're looking for as a regulator is we are looking for a risk management approach. So it is around the systems for identifying psychosocial hazards, assessing, controlling, and then really importantly evaluating how that's going in consultation with staff. So that's going to look different at different workplaces depending on their size, their context and how they're set up. But if we can see how is that information coming in, are there reporting systems, have there been the kinds of work that we've just been hearing about in terms of surveys, have there been discussions around what is most stressful? It doesn't have to look the same, but that's kind of the starting point, and then that feeds into how do we prioritise that, again in consultation, how do we implement controls that are most effective. So we are, again, I guess evolving our approach as a regulator as well, and trying to ask the questions around what are, how do we focus on working out, are the controls being implemented and are they being implemented in a risk-based manner? So one of the things I hear commonly from PCBUs is, the record keeping, I have to keep records all the time or you're going to get me. So what is your expectation around record keeping around psychosocial hazards? It's a very interesting one, and I look, a lot of work health and safety record keeping is similarly very interesting. I think organisations have a risk of setting their own standards, and they perhaps go beyond what the regulations require. So it's important to say, well, what's the right level of record keeping for our organisation? And again, it's something to consult on and have a look at the regulations and the codes and so forth and go, what do we need? What is the right size? Because when we use our work health and safety resources and our management resources, we want to be strategic around that. And if we're spending a lot of that resource in a really detailed record, we are losing opportunities.
So I'm just going to do one more from the audience before I turn to Lachlan and Dylan. So how can psychosocial risk management be better integrated with traditional safety systems to avoid unnecessary work and duplication? I reckon that's a great question.
I think so as well. I really like that question, and I think from our perspective that is a really good way to go, because while we have talked about how psychosocial hazards are broad and they cross over many things, and they're important in design, they cross with HR and all of those things. One of the ways that you might want to systematise that, document it, without taking away any of the consultation conversations that you want to have across the organisation. But the framework for recording it can actually look a little bit like the one you're already using, hopefully, for physical hazards, with perhaps a few tweaks, because when people are reporting some of these things, there might be further issues with confidentiality that might be additional to what you need for your physical hazards. So if you give that some thought, how do we do it in a way that manages those risks, then I think you can look to parallel or a similar or integrated systems.
Sally, you also know in conversations with you and your other staff that one of the things about doing that is that the control that you may have for one hazard will actually be helpful for another. So did you want to, I'll go to Lachlan after that. Do you want to comment on that?
It certainly can be, and there were some great examples earlier on around the work environment and dealing with physical hazards which are stressful and getting those resolved, and how that can be really helpful. So there can definitely be a crossover, but similarly I think also when we introduce new controls, and whether for physical or psychosocial, is to ask ourselves early on about what are the risks of unintended consequences and other hazards. So it goes a bit both ways, and it's important to look at both of those directions that it could go.
Thanks, Sally. Lachlan, I was really interested in your presentation where you were talking about the project planning you were doing when you were going into tender processes, which actually is an example of best practices that from conception through to delivery and evaluation. So I wondered if you could kind of expand a little bit more about how you identified that the tender processes had been an issue, and then how did you get the right people, the right decision makers in the room? Because we talked earlier about there are a whole range of people through the organisation who might have been influencing that tender process.
Yeah, so I think I'm going to give you it's a very non-complex answer to this, I'm sorry, but how do we identify it? Our WHS manager was a part of the auditing process. Really a core fountain of knowledge to contribute into the auditing process that we were doing at that stage. And I can't remember which element within the Thrive framework, but as we were working our way through it, he really identified that as one of the challenges that he kind of had to try and clean up, I guess, at the other end. So involving those kind of people within the process, because we could have, like my position in the organisation, I could have charged off without him if I wanted to. That wouldn't have been wise, but so that's really where it came from, was you need the people who are feeling the problem to have the voice to tell you about that problem. Then was able to identify it. And then in terms of, again, non-complex answer, but my line manager, our general manager for service strategy, was also leading the tender process, really. So that I had a very quick, so it's a very non-complex answer, but I basically just said to my boss, hey, can you please do this? And she said, yeah, all right, we'll make sure we implement that. But I think there were further conversations, though, having the avenue into our senior leadership, so which is a part of our senior leadership group, to also have that whole team be aware of that as a challenge and understand why that was a challenge, and then be part of the solution to that. Because in the end, the tender process and the service operation were separate processes, separate things, and so those key people needed to be part of that conversation.
So often I think we'll see in the real world is that if those processes are split, then the people who are doing the real work aren't consulted enough, and Sally will tell us it's part of the duties of consultation, collaboration and cooperation. So well done. So I've got a high praise for you, Dylan. Awesome work. How do you break the barriers in a predominantly male sector? How well are those initiatives being received, and are they supported by other businesses?
Look, I think from where our business sits, historically, we were a subcontractor to the larger businesses. So we acted as a conduit, really, from the floor to bigger end of town, I guess. So with the work that we do Mates in Construction's work that they do is just, it's ahead of the game, and we're incredibly well supported and well resourced in the construction industry. And I think it's highlighted to me is the important part that we've got to play to educate and grow those conversations for people to take it back into their footy clubs and netball clubs and whatever their schools and stuff, because that's the area that we need to provide the support in.
So one of the things we all talk about and we see in the code is the importance of talking to workers. They do the work, they know the problems, they usually know the solutions. And your Talking Trail program probably picked up lots of work-related causes for stress as well as non-work related. How did you respect people's privacy and feed that intelligence anonymously up to the management team so they could start addressing the work-related causes?
I think pre-acquisition from Melchor into Monadelphous, the management team was myself and I guess my partner that started it. So a lot of the roads led to us. And that's the benefit of being a smaller sized business, I guess. We were 500 employees, but you had that authentic and genuineness because you could always get to a decision maker. Through lived experience, unfortunately, there was enough people around me that we'd seen the impact and felt the loss of suicide in particular. And then even to this day, like I still don't forget Tom Quinn and and so we made that commitment, and I think that authenticness is what came through for us to continue to make a difference. How it's working, I guess I can only go off the way that it's working on a couple of things. Just when we came out of COVID, in the space of 24 hours, we had 2 guys removed from a Pilbara site, both on high alert suicide watch, suicide intervention, I guess, sorry, not suicide watch. And still to this day, we had 250 employees at the time. And number one, we were all aware of, we were walking around, we knew it was a ticking time bomb. The other one was 250, and still none of us to this day can see. But 250 got the help, injected himself. It was managed that he got off site, got to a hospital, and he's still here with us today. So I think the fact that that's working is, people say, how are you going to judge, how are you going to capture those statistics? Well, in the field, when you're directly employed with your employees, that's how you're going to capture it, is that they're still here to tell the story.
And following on from that, I can see Lachlan, a question here, and I'm going to phrase it to you, is how is your organisation reporting hazards, and are there issues with stigma of your workers actually telling you what's going on, and can you provide some advice on managing any stigma about saying, hey, I'm not coping?
Sure. I mean, in terms of how we report hazards, I would say that's not my area of expertise, so I don't know the exact answer to that. So sorry, can take that on notice and come back to you guys. But in terms of stigma, I think the awareness raising that we were doing was perhaps different to what Dylan's team has been doing, but with the same intent. And so really to raise awareness around a range of mental health issues, and really trying to decrease stigma in asking for help. I guess the community services sector is a little bit interesting because self-care is something that I think largely the sector is good at and we're good at, but really truly putting your hand up and saying that you're not coping, there's absolutely still stigma around that, and around I guess some challenges around identifying as having a lived experience of mental health issues. And so yeah, the awareness raising was really, really important. I guess perhaps not answering in terms of how we've solved that problem, but something that I think we've seen is that there's a challenge in, as helpers, also making sure that you're helping yourself. Like sometimes we're really good at that, and sometimes we're really quite terrible at it. So that awareness raising that, and also done from within our Well at Work group, so it's done by our people, for our people. It's not done by our P&C team, it's all by someone at our head office, although some of it is, but it's really a ground up kind of approach to awareness raising and destigmatising.
A wonderful program.
I think just one thing to add on there around training and that as well. And look, we've spoken today about the importance of mental health and particularly myself about suicide training, but I think we need to expand that scope of training. And I look at the apprentices that we bring into our workforce and industry. We put as much effort into to try and give them financial education as well, because if we're not getting to the end of the line of financial problems down the track, how are we setting them up for success? So we look at it, and particularly as a construction industry, we roll out dogman tickets and working at heights, and we roll out all this kind of training, but we really want to focus on how do we make them better people, and how do we make them better people in their community. So how do we take these stresses off of financial relationship stresses, and that's as much of a business and the people that we want to create into it, because with all due respect, we can train trades to be as good at trades, but we want to give them that skill set to try and avoid some of these issues. And I think that's as important part of all of us can take back, is don't just look at training of learning a skill for you to do your job. Let's educate the people around us of a training that might help them, and that might also help. Don't underestimate the skills that you've got to help your workforce or your colleagues of, as simple things around, how do I do my super? How do I do this? So
I think that's a great example, Sally, of moving beyond what what would be compliance into better practice, so that you're addressing the underlying hazards and doing more. So I'm going to finish with one last question for you, Sally, and then I'd like all of you just to give us a single and powerful take-home message. So, Sally, here's a good one. Are there any upcoming regulatory changes PCB you should know about that will directly affect psychosocial risk management? Changes, sorry.
There's always a lot going on. I think probably the main piece just to keep an eye out for is the work that's going on with codes of practice. So we do have some codes coming and under development in things like FIFO, public sector, and we're also giving some consideration to how our psychosocial codes are structured for so that they're as I guess usable for yourselves as possible. So do stay engaged with us and keep an eye out for updates on those.
And one last key message from you, Sally, before I move to Lachlan.
Look, I think it's probably one that's, this is one, look, you're all here because you're engaged. So if you've already started down this path, that's fabulous. And I'll just encourage you to make sure you've got strong consultation through the path. But if you haven't started on the path yet, there's a lot of resources out there. So just kind of taking the first step, getting that right group together to take the first step and start on this pathway.
And Lachlan, a key message from you?
I would say resourcing, so time. Time needs to be dedicated and allocated to this work to do it properly, and that needs to come from everyone in this room, but also executive teams as well. I think in addition to that, the time. A lot of that is the listening, the consultation. You cannot do this work without involving the key people in the organisation, which includes frontline people doing the actual work.
And Dylan.
I think I say to my kids all the time, say hello to people. They always say to me, "Why do you say hello to everyone?" I think we lose that art of just talking these days. We spend so much time in text messages and phones. We've lost the art of communicating, and that's how you're going to pick up if anyone's all right or wrong. And my 7-year-old daughter did it the other day. We were walking somewhere in the city, and she went and said hello to a homeless man that was sitting there. And she ran up and did up her sleeve, but it proved the exact point that I think as a society we sit behind digital technology and we don't know, we've lost the art of feeling. So I encourage you to, when you do want to check in on your mate or your friend or colleague, ask them verbally how they're going. A text message or a Teams message is great, but that human interaction will be the big difference.
Thanks very much. And I guess my final message is dig deep. Don't just look for the superficial issues. Work design isn't as hard as it thinks. Ask workers what the problem is, ask them what the solution is, and just start. So I'd like to thank everybody else. And now I believe Sally is going to do our closing. Is that right?